The Christmas lights flickered against frosted windows, casting warm, golden halos across the living room. Laughter rose from the fireplace, where my parents lounged with glasses of wine, their smiles smug, their voices too loud, as if they wanted the whole world to hear how content they were. But in the corner, just beyond the glow, I saw him. My grandfather. His shoulders hunched beneath a thin sweater that did nothing against the draft leaking in through the patio doors. His hand shook violently, rattling the porcelain cup he held. And no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they didn't care. I opened my mouth, ready to speak, but my father's eyes snapped toward me. A glare. A warning. Then he chuckled and leaned back, tossing another log into the fire as if mocking the very chill that made Grandpa shiver. They thought they'd silenced me. They thought I'd stay quiet, like always. But this night wasn't going to end the way they imagined. Growing up, I always believed family meant warmth. It meant a safe place to fall, a table where every chair mattered, a fire that burned equally for all of us. But the older I got, the more I realized that in my family, warmth wasn't something shared. It was something hoarded. And those who held it, my parents especially, decided who deserved it and who didn't. I was the kind of kid who followed rules. I worked hard, got good grades, and didn't ask for much. I wasn't the loudest voice at the dinner table, nor the one cracking jokes or demanding attention. I thought being steady, reliable, invisible even, was enough. But in this house, invisibility was the same as being forgotten. My parents had a strange way of playing favorites. My sister, Elaine, with her glamorous laugh and endless appetite for drama, always had their spotlight. If she wanted new shoes, she got them. If she failed a class, there was always a soft excuse waiting. Me? I was the responsible one, which was really just their code for, we don't have to worry about you, so we don't have to care about you. But my grandfather, he noticed. He was the only one who ever paused long enough to ask how my day really was. His hands were calloused from years of working as a carpenter, yet they were gentle when he slid a folded $20 bill into my pocket, whispering, "Don't tell your parents. Save this for something that matters to you." That $20 bill became symbolic. I never spent it. Instead, I tucked each one he gave me into a small wooden box I kept under my bed. Over time, the box grew heavy, not just with money, but with meaning. To me, it wasn't cash. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't invisible to everyone. Proof that at least one person thought I mattered. Still, even his kindness couldn't protect me from the sting of favoritism. One Christmas, years before the party where everything unraveled, my parents had everyone gather around the tree. Elaine unwrapped a gleaming new iPhone, top of the line, complete with a bow. Gasps and applause filled the room as she squealed, hugging them tightly. Then it was my turn. My gift was a sweater. Not just any sweater, but one with the store's clearance tag still dangling from the sleeve. They laughed when I pointed it out, as though it was some kind of inside joke, but it wasn't funny. Not to me. My cheeks burned while Elaine slipped her phone into her pocket like a crown jewel, basking in the glow of approval. That was the first time I felt the sting of humiliation in front of everyone I was supposed to trust. And though I swallowed it, pressing my lips shut so no one could hear the crack in my voice, I promised myself I'd never forget it. From then on, the pattern deepened. My parents would boast about Elaine's accomplishments, no matter how small, while mine were brushed aside. If I stayed late at work to help my boss, I was wasting my time. If Elaine stayed late at a party, she was networking. Their favoritism wasn't loud, it was insidious, like a draft seeping in through old windows. You didn't always notice it at first. But eventually, it chilled you to the bone. And in the middle of it all was Grandpa, slowly fading with age. He lived with us part-time, drifting between our house and my uncle's. He never complained, but I could see the weight pressing down on him, his body growing frail, his steps slower, his silences longer. My parents treated him like an obligation, a chore they couldn't wait to hand off. But to me, he was an anchor, which is why, that Christmas night by the fireplace, watching him shiver while my parents laughed, it wasn't just about him being cold. It was about everything. Every sweater with a clearance tag. Every ignored report card. Every smirk across a room that told me I wasn't good enough. And yet, in that moment, I didn't know this would become the night everything cracked open. I just knew I was tired of swallowing the sting. And soon, I'd learn that even the quiet ones, the ones who seem invisible, can roar loud enough to shake the whole house. The weeks after that Christmas didn't calm down. If anything, the fire burned hotter. My parents seemed emboldened by how easily I'd stayed quiet that night. They'd laugh about Grandpa's old man complaints as if shivering were a comedy act. When he coughed in the mornings, Dad would mutter under his breath, "Should have worn a thicker sweater," as though freezing in your own home was a personal failure. But it wasn't just about Grandpa. Their favoritism and cruelty tightened like a vice around me, too. Take January, for example. My company had just awarded me Employee of the Month, a recognition I had worked late nights to earn. I came home, plaque in hand, and set it proudly on the counter. Mom barely glanced up from her wine glass. "That's nice," she said, "but Elaine got invited to another gala this weekend. Did you see her dress? Stunning." Just like that, my achievement was erased, swept aside by another glittering spotlight shining only on Elaine. It was death by 1,000 cuts, small, sharp humiliations. Each one drew blood, but never enough to make anyone else notice. I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was overreacting. Wondering if maybe they were right, that I was boring, unworthy, invisible. My chest felt heavy, my thoughts circling like vultures. And all the while, Grandpa grew weaker. I started noticing how long it took him to get from the kitchen to his chair. How his hands trembled when he tried to butter toast. Yet when I offered to help, Dad barked, "Don't baby him." He needs to stay strong. No one wanted to see the truth. Grandpa was slipping, and I was the only one paying attention. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. My parents hosted a family gathering. Laughter filled the living room, champagne glasses clinked, and Elaine, draped in sequins, held court like a queen. I carried out a tray of snacks, careful not to drop anything. As I passed, Dad gave Elaine a proud pat on the shoulder and said loudly, "This one, she's the future of the family. The real success." Then he turned to me with a smirk. "And you're reliable. Like an old workhorse. We always know you'll do the chores." Everyone laughed, everyone but me. I stood there, my hands gripping the tray so tightly my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just a joke, it was a public declaration. I wasn't a star, I was a mule. That night, I sat awake in my room, staring at the little wooden box of 20s Grandpa had given me over the years. Each bill, folded neatly, carried more love than I'd ever received from my own parents. My chest ached, my throat raw with words I never spoke aloud. For the first time, I let myself cry. Not the quiet tears I usually swallowed, but deep, guttural sobs that shook me until my pillow was soaked. And when the storm inside me quieted, a thought lingered in the silence. Maybe they'll never see me. Maybe they'll never care. That thought terrified me. But then, something happened. A week later, as I was leaving work late, again, I noticed one of my coworkers waiting by the door. Her name was Sarah. She was a little older than me, sharp-eyed but kind, the type of person who listened more than she spoke. "You okay?" she asked as I fumbled with my bag. I nodded automatically, but then she tilted her head, studying me the way only people who actually see you can. "You don't look okay," she said softly. For reasons I couldn't explain, the wall I always kept up cracked. I told her about the way my family treated me. Not all of it, just enough for her to understand why I always looked so tired. She listened. Really listened. And when I finished, she said something no one had ever told me before. You know, you're not crazy. And you're definitely not invisible. They just don't deserve to see you. Her words landed like a spark in dry grass. For the first time, I realized the problem wasn't me. It was them. I walked home that night with something I hadn't felt in years. The faintest flicker of hope. That was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone. By February, the cracks in our family weren't just visible, they were gaping. Grandpa had caught the flu, his frail body shaking under a mountain of blankets. He needed care, real care, but my parents treated him like a burden that disrupted their social calendar. One evening, I found him wheezing in his chair, his tea long gone cold. I wrapped a blanket tighter around him and whispered, "You need to see a doctor." His hand squeezed mine, weak but firm. "Don't tell your father," he rasped. "He'll just say I'm exaggerating." I swallowed hard. The anger in me was no longer a flicker, it was a roaring fire. But anger alone wasn't enough. My parents sensed my defiance growing. The glares became sharper, the comments more cutting. One night at dinner, Mom dropped her fork with a clatter and said, "You're becoming disrespectful. You think you know better than us." Dad leaned back, crossing his arms. "If you want to stay under this roof, you follow our rules. That means no undermining us, especially in front of family. Understand?" The silence stretched like a noose around my neck. Grandpa's cough echoed faintly from the other room, and still they sat there, smug, sipping wine. I nodded, because what else could I do? But inside, my resolve hardened. The real blow came a week later. My parents called a family meeting. The phrase alone made my stomach twist. It was never a conversation, always a performance. Elaine sat smugly at the head of the sofa, like royalty on her throne. Dad cleared his throat and announced, "We've decided Grandpa can't stay here anymore. He's too much trouble." My blood ran cold. "What? He's family. He's sick." Mom's eyes narrowed. "We've carried this weight long enough. Your uncle can deal with him." "But he can't," I protested. "Uncle's house isn't set up for this. Grandpa needs stability. He needs us." Dad slammed his hand against the table. "Enough! We are the decision makers here, not you. If you can't respect that, maybe you should think about where you belong too." For the first time, they weren't just threatening Grandpa's place. They were threatening mine. The walls closed in. My parents had always used favoritism as a weapon, but now they were flexing raw authority. I felt cornered, powerless, until I remembered something. That little wooden box. It wasn't just filled with Grandpa's folded bills. It was filled with records. Over the years, I'd saved every note, every receipt, every small scrap of proof that Grandpa was the one quietly funding things my parents never bothered with. A new pair of shoes when mine had holes. Money for school supplies. Even part of my first semester's tuition had come from him, not them. And then there were my journals. I had documented it all, their favoritism, their cruelty, their exact words from those family meetings. For years, writing had been my therapy. Now I realized it was evidence. That night, as my parents clinked glasses in victory, I slipped into my room, pulled the box from under my bed, and spread everything across the floor. My hands trembled as I organized the bills, the notes, the entries, each one a shard of truth they thought would stay buried. It was like assembling a weapon, and when Sarah texted me later, just checking in, I confessed everything. She didn't hesitate. "You can't fight them alone," she said, "but with the right support, maybe you don't have to." Her words lit something in me. My parents thought they'd cornered me. They thought I'd bow down like always. But this time, I had proof. And I had an ally. The next time my father sneered, "You think you can stand against us?" I looked him straight in the eye. For the first time, I didn't flinch. They thought they still had control, I whispered to myself later that night, clutching the wooden box. They didn't. After that night, it felt like living in enemy territory. My parents must have sensed the shift in me, the way I no longer bowed my head, the way my eyes lingered on them with quiet defiance. And instead of backing down, they escalated. It began with whispers. At church, neighbors gave me sideways glances. A family friend cornered me in the parking lot, lowering her voice. "Your mother told me you've been acting out, that you've been cruel to your grandfather. Is that true?" The words slammed into me. Cruel to Grandpa? The very man I was trying to protect? I shook my head furiously. No, that's not true at all, but the seed was planted. Rumors grew roots. By the following week, Sarah told me she overheard 2 co-workers murmuring in the break room, repeating the same lie, that I was neglectful, selfish, ungrateful. It was my parents' classic tactic. If they couldn't silence me, they'd smear me. And it worked. For a while. I felt eyes on me everywhere, like invisible hands pushing me deeper into isolation. Even Elaine joined in, posting vague, glittery captions on her social media. Some people pretend to care for family, but their true colors always show. Her followers applauded her, none the wiser. At home, the air thickened with hostility. Dad would sigh heavily whenever I walked into a room, muttering, "Here comes the martyr." Mom would set down her wine glass and remark, "I don't know why you make things harder than they need to be." Every word chipped at me. Every glance reminded me, they wanted me broken, but something inside me had changed. I was done playing the role of the family scapegoat. So I started documenting. Every insult, every manipulation, every twisted rumor, I wrote it down. I saved text messages, emails, even voice recordings when I could. The wooden box that once held folded 20s was now a growing arsenal of truth. At the same time, I sought help. Sarah introduced me to a lawyer she knew casually, someone who specialized in elder rights. I didn't have money for full representation, but he gave me advice for free over coffee. If they're neglecting your grandfather, document everything. Photos, dates, times. Don't confront them directly. Build a case first. I nodded, my chest tight but determined. So I did. When Grandpa shivered in his chair with no blanket while the fire roared, I snapped a photo. When his medication went unfilled for a week because it slipped their minds, I wrote the date down. Every careless laugh at his expense, every selfish decision, it all went into the record. Meanwhile, my parents grew bolder. They threw another party in early March, parading Elaine like royalty, while Grandpa sat in the corner, ignored. When I offered him food, Mom barked, "Don't fuss. He'll eat if he's hungry." The guests laughed, but I saw their discomfort. For the first time, a few eyes shifted, not toward me, but toward them. The tide was turning, even if they didn't know it. At night, I'd sit with Grandpa, holding his frail hand as he whispered stories of his youth, how he'd built his first house with nothing but grit and stubbornness. "Never let them take your worth," he murmured, his eyes glassy but fierce. I promised him I wouldn't. And as the weeks passed, I realized the war wasn't just about me anymore. It was about him, about protecting the man who had protected me when no one else did. The stakes rose with every passing day. The rumors got louder. My parents tightened their grip. But I wasn't the same silent child anymore. I was gathering strength, allies, proof. And deep down, I knew something they didn't. The day of reckoning was coming, and no one could stop it. It happened on a Sunday afternoon in late March. The living room was crowded again. Neighbors, relatives, even church friends, drawn in by my parents' endless appetite for spectacle. Elaine sparkled in her sequined dress, twirling for attention, while Mom and Dad basked in admiration like monarchs on thrones. But this time was different. Grandpa sat slumped in the corner, his breathing shallow, his blanket slipping from his shoulders. I adjusted it for him quietly. Dad noticed and smirked. "There you go again," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, hovering like a nursemaid. "You'd think he's helpless." Laughter rippled through the room. My fists clenched. I felt the sting, the humiliation, but also the weight of the wooden box tucked safely in my bag. This was it. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The room hushed a little, surprised at my interruption. I'd never dared to steal their spotlight before. "I think everyone here deserves to know the truth," I said, my voice trembling at first, then steadying. Mom's smile froze. "Sit down," she hissed. But I didn't. I walked to the center of the room and pulled out the stack of papers, photos, and notes from my bag. "For years, you've painted me as ungrateful." Lazy, even cruel to my own grandfather. I looked around, meeting eyes one by one. "But here's what you never told anyone." I held up a faded receipt, taped carefully to a notebook page. When I couldn't afford school supplies, it wasn't my parents who stepped up. It was Grandpa. When my shoes had holes, he bought me new ones. When I started college, he gave me money to help cover tuition. Every $20 bill he ever slipped me is right here. Gasps fluttered across the room. I placed the stack on the coffee table, like evidence in a courtroom. "And while you," I said, turning to my parents, "sat by the fire, laughing, he was shivering in this very room. I have photos, I have dates, I have every time you chose appearances over compassion. I laid down the pictures. Grandpa wrapped in a too-thin sweater while flames roared in the fireplace, his medication bottles still half empty, his eyes weary. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Elaine looked stunned. Dad's face darkened. "This is nonsense. You're twisting things." "No," I cut him off, my voice sharp, unwavering. "This is truth. And everyone here can see it." For the first time, his words faltered. His hand trembled as he reached for his glass of wine, and I realized something I'd never seen before. Fear. Mom tried to recover, laughing nervously. "You're being dramatic. Families aren't perfect." I stepped closer. "This isn't about imperfection. It's about cruelty disguised as tradition, neglect dressed up as authority, favoritism so blatant it left scars you can't even see." The room was dead silent. Every eye was on me. I looked at Grandpa. His eyes glistened with tears, but behind them, I saw pride. Turning back to my parents, I said clearly, calmly, "I don't want apologies. I want change." The words landed like a hammer. No one laughed this time. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, whispers rising. Elaine stared at her phone, unable to meet my gaze. My parents sat frozen, their empire of control cracking under the weight of undeniable truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible one. I was the voice they could no longer silence. The days after that confrontation were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For once, the whispers didn't surround me. They surrounded them. Neighbors stopped dropping by as often. Invitations to parties thinned. Even at church, the admiring smiles my parents had grown used to collecting shifted into cautious glances. Their perfect image had cracked, and everyone could see through the fractures. At home, the silence was heavy. My father, usually loud and commanding, avoided eye contact. Mom spent hours locked in her room, blinds drawn. Elaine scrolled endlessly on her phone, her glitter dulled without an audience to applaud it. And Grandpa, he seemed lighter, even as his body weakened. I'd catch him smiling at me when no one else was watching, his eyes warm, proud. One evening, as I tucked his blanket tighter around him, he whispered, "You did what I couldn't. You gave them the truth." His voice was frail, but it carried a weight that settled deep in my chest. But change didn't happen overnight. My parents tried to claw back control. They insisted the evidence I'd shown was exaggerated, that I'd twisted everything out of bitterness. Yet, the more they protested, the more they revealed their desperation, and the less people believed them. The wooden box, once hidden under my bed, now sat on my dresser in plain sight. Not as a secret weapon anymore, but as a reminder of resilience. Every folded bill, every note from Grandpa, every documented slight, it was the story of survival, proof that I had always mattered, even when they tried to convince me otherwise. Grandpa passed away peacefully a few months later, his hand in mine. The grief hit me hard, but it wasn't hollow. He left this world knowing he wasn't invisible. He left knowing someone had fought for him. At his funeral, I placed the wooden box on the table beside his photo. Not for money, not for evidence, but as a tribute. A symbol of the quiet love that had carried me through. Guests who once laughed at my parents' jokes now whispered to me instead, telling me how brave it was to stand up, how much they admired the bond I had with him. And my parents? They stood stiff at the front, but the spotlight was gone. The control, the smugness, it had evaporated. For once, they were just small. In the weeks after, I made choices I never thought I'd have the courage to make. I moved out of the house that had been a prison, found a modest apartment where the air didn't feel heavy with judgment. Sarah helped me furnish it with second-hand treasures, laughing as we carried boxes up the stairs. For the first time, I felt like I was building something of my own. I started therapy too. It wasn't easy, peeling back years of neglect, but with each session, I reclaimed another piece of myself. I learned that being the responsible one didn't mean carrying everyone else's cruelty. It meant building boundaries strong enough to keep myself safe. And the wooden box? I kept it. But I transformed it. Instead of hoarding old bills and painful reminders, I filled it with new things. Postcards from places I wanted to visit, notes from Sarah, small mementos of victories that were mine alone. What once symbolized survival now symbolized possibility. One night, sitting by my apartment window, as the city lights blinked below, I thought back to that Christmas party. The laughter by the fire, Grandpa shivering in the corner, my parents smug, certain they'd won. And then I thought of now, of the silence that followed when truth shattered their performance, of the strength I had found in my own voice. The contrast was cinematic. I wasn't the invisible child anymore. I wasn't the workhorse, I wasn't the afterthought. I was the one who endured, who spoke, who changed the story. And though the scars would never fully fade, I smiled to myself as I whispered the truth I'd finally come to believe. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. As maybe your story doesn't look exactly like mine. Maybe it's not a Christmas party, or a shivering grandfather in the corner. But favoritism, betrayal, cruelty, those shadows take many forms. Have you ever been told you were less than? Have you ever carried the weight of silence because speaking the truth felt impossible? I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments, not just for me, but for the people scrolling who need to know they're not alone. Because here's the truth I learned the hard way. Worth isn't something they hand you. It isn't wrapped in shiny paper under a tree. Worth is something you claim for yourself. And once you do, no one, no parent, no sibling, no so-called authority can take it away.